This is how I made my pie face. I started out with a pie tin from Dollar Tree, then I glued a bunch of aluminum foil onto the pan so it takes up space, just so I didn't have to use as much spackling. I bought these piping bags and tips for a fake cake, but it also works for a pie as well. For the pie filling, I'm using lightweight spackle, and I'm going to mix it with acrylic paint. I'm going to make it a brown color to make it look like meat. Once I have the color that I want, I just start piping it into the pie tin. I wasn't too worried about this, but I just made a bunch of squiggles and lumps to make it get that texture of cooked ground beef. Once it was dry, I started painting it with acrylic paint. I started out with this brown color and just did kind of almost like a dry brush on it. Then I dabbed at any spots that had too much paint on it. And then I went in with a darker brown just on the tips to make that crispy cooked beef color. I'm doing a dry brush technique so it doesn't get into the crevices. And this is how it looks so far. And then I went in with an off-white color. When you cook ground beef, it gets that greasy fat. And then once it cools down, it turns to that white fatty color. So I just wanted to add that into my pie to give it more dimension. But it really didn't matter because most of this gets covered up by the face anyways. Then I added a little bit of red to get that bloody color into it. Once the paint was dry, it's now time to add the face. I'm using a silicone face that I already have. Of course, not everyone has a silicone face just lying around. You can also make a face with clay. And I would do it similar to the way that the vegan pastry chef makes her pie faces with pastry dough. I'll tag her in the captions if you want to see how she does it. Anyways, I tried to glue down the silicone face and then pin it to get it to stick, but nothing really sticks to silicone, so this didn't really work anyways. But pinning it down did help for later. Once the face was pinned down, I mixed another batch of spackle and made it more of a crust color. Then I just start piping the edges of the face. It didn't matter how this piping looked, this was just to kind of fill up the spaces so I can make the crust on the top. I've never really done piping, so this is me practicing how to do the crust. And then I just went in with it. I don't know how real cake makers do this. Piping is so freaking hard. I ended up not liking this and wiping it all off and then redoing it over again. I thought the first time the squiggles were a little too small, so I made these a little bit wider. And then if there was a part that I didn't like, I just wiped it off and then redid it again until I liked it. Once I finished the spackling, I put it outside to dry. Letting it sit out in the sun made it dry super fast, so it was already hard after about an hour or two. The spackling on the side kind of acted like a glue to keep the silicone face on, so I was able to take the pins out and it stayed pretty well. Then it was time to paint the crust to make it look more realistic. I first went in with the off-white color. I put the pie in the deeper crevices of the pie, because in a real pie, those would be the parts where the pastry didn't get as brown since it was in deeper parts of it. And any parts that were too white, I just brushed it off with my hand. And then I went in with the brown paint. And this is for the browning of the pie crust. So I put it at the higher tips of the crust where it would brown the most. I added water to the acrylic paint so I could just do a wash of the color, just to make sure there weren't any hard lines of paint. And then with a slightly darker brown, I brushed just on the tips where it would brown the most in the oven. Then onto the face. Since I'm painting silicone, I used alcohol activated paints for this. I used my Skin Illustrator SFX palette for this. I used a mixture of the blood and aged blood tones to color in the eye sockets. Then the same colors to put in the nose and the mouth as well. I'm just adding blood into all the little crevices of the face. It was looking a little too clean, so I spattered on more of the alcohol paints, concentrating on the areas where blood would seep out of the face. If this was in the oven, the skin would also brown a little bit, so I used a brown tone alcohol paint to just stipple on the areas where it would brown the most, which would be the highest points of the face. So the nose, the chin, the cheeks, and a little bit above the eyes. I wanted the pie to look wet, so I mixed up some resin and made it a reddish brown color. I would never want to serve a dry meat pie, so I stippled on the resin to make it look like it was juicy. Since the silicone wasn't glued down, I also used the resin to kind of use it as a glue so it would stick to the spackling. I also made sure to go into the lips and nose to make it wet looking, and then I brushed the resin over the crust because I wanted to make it look like an egg wash. When you cook a pie, the filling usually kind of seeps out of the pie, so this is what I was just emulating. This is also another step just to help the silicone stay in place. I then added globs of resin where I thought the meat juices would pool at. So the eye crevices, the nose, and the corners of the mouth. Once I was done with the resin and I liked how it was looking, I just let that out in the sun so it could cure. And that's it. I wanted to do some close-ups so you can really see all the texture in the pie. Hello.